flowery silence.
Welcome back to Cityscape. In this episode of Secret People, we will cover Thomas Sowell, an American economist and social theorist known for challenging the conventional wisdom of civil rights and social justice. According to the 2019 survey of consumer finances, white families have a median net worth of $188,200, while blacks have a median net worth of just $24,100. This means that white families, on average, have a median net worth that is nearly 8 times that of blacks. A person with social justice inclinations might conclude that this wealth gap is due to racial discrimination, but our guest in this episode argues otherwise. In fact, Thomas Sowell virtually challenges the entire narrative on race and social inequalities, pointing to alternative causes that are worthy of considering. As always, let's start with a brief background. Thomas Sowell was born in Gastonia, North Carolina, on June 30th, 1930. His father died shortly before he was born, and his mother was a housemaid who already had 4 children. At the age of 9, his family moved to New York City, where he studied at Stuyvesant High School, but was forced to drop out at the age of 17 because of financial difficulties. At the age of 21, he was drafted into the Marine Corps to serve in the Korean War. After his discharge, Sowell attended night classes at Howard University and then transferred to Harvard, where he graduated magna cum laude in 1958 with a bachelor's degree in economics. He then earned a master's degree from Columbia University the following year and a Ph.D. in economics from the University of Chicago. Thomas Sowell enjoyed a long teaching career. He taught economics at Cornell University, Rutgers, UCLA, and since 1980, has been a senior fellow of the Hoover Institution at Stanford. Sowell has also written over 30 books. The most popular ones are Basic Economics, A Conflict of Visions, and Intellectuals in Society. This episode, however, will focus on what I believe to be his best work: Black Rednecks and White Liberals. We tend to believe that hip-hop and the thug culture it promotes are part of the unique identity of black people, but Sowell argues otherwise. The book begins by making the surprising statement that thug culture is a derivative of redneck culture. It goes on providing historical details, revealing the striking similarities between the two. On page 10, for an example, the book states,
"The very way of talking, later to be christened Black English, closely followed dialects brought over from those parts of Britain from which many white Southerners came. Though these speech patterns died out in Britain while surviving in the American South, as such speech patterns would later die out amongst Southern whites and among middle-class blacks, while surviving in the poorer black ghettos around the country. For example, where a Northerner said, 'I am,' 'you are,' 'she isn't,' 'it doesn't,' and 'I haven't,' a Virginian, even of high rank, preferred to say, 'I be,' 'you be,' 'she ain't,' 'it don't,' and 'I ain't.' These Virginian speechways were not invented in America. They derived from a family of regional dialects that were spoken throughout the south and west of England during the 17th century.
The book also addresses black pride, a concept Thomas Sowell does not endorse and sees as vain and empty. On a side note, I kind of agree. When someone mentions white pride, for an example, we either cringe or think the person is a Hitler in the making. Therefore, I personally find ideas of black pride just as silly. Anyway, Sowell goes on to say that pride has yet another side to it. He states,
Centuries before black pride became a fashionable phrase, there was cracker pride, and it was very much the same kind of pride. It was not pride in any particular achievement or set of behavioral standards. It was instead a touchiness about anything that might even be remotely construed as a personal slight, much less an insult, combined with a willingness to erupt into violence over it. New Englanders were baffled about this kind of pride among crackers. Observing such people, the Yankees could not understand what they had to feel proud about. This kind of pride is best illustrated by an episode reported in Professor McWhiney's Cracker Culture. When an Englishman, tired of waiting for a Southerner to start working on a house he had contracted to build, hired another man to do the job, the enraged Southerner, who considered himself dishonored, vowed, "Tomorrow morn, I will come with men and 20 rifles, and I will have your life, or you shall have mine." In the vernacular of our later times, he had been dissed, and he was not going to stand for it.
According to Sowell, redneck patterns became the cultural heritage of blacks, who erroneously now identify it as their own, when in fact, this cultural pattern went back to the turbulent regions of Britain where white Southerners came from. It is not hard to recognize clear parallels between those behaviors and that of ghetto gangs today, who kill over a look, or a word, or any other action that can be construed as, quote, dissing them.
Books, business, technology, and science were not the kind of things likely to be promoted or admired in the world of rednecks and crackers. Manliness and the forceful projection of that manliness to others, an advertising of one's willingness to fight, and even put one's life on the line, were at least plausible means of gaining whatever measure of security was possible in a lawless region and violent time. What the rednecks or crackers brought with them across the ocean was a whole constellation of attitudes, values, and behavior patterns that might have made sense in the world in which they had lived for centuries, but which would prove to be counterproductive in the world to which they were going. The cultural values and social patterns among Southern whites included an aversion to work, proneness to violence, neglect of education, sexual promiscuity, improvidence, drunkenness, lack of entrepreneurship, reckless searches for excitement, lively music and dance, and style of religious oratory marked by strident rhetoric, unbridled emotions, and flamboyant imagery. Touchy pride, vanity, and boastful self-dramatization were also part of this redneck culture among people from regions of Britain.
It is this culture, according to Sowell, that produces destructive behavioral patterns, such as crimes and single parenthood. This in turn leads to poor education, low skills, and social attitudes that turn many employers away from black applicants. Sowell also states that these behavioral patterns are exacerbated by the welfare state because they allow the counterproductive patterns to continue by shielding the individual from their full consequences. Sowell is not denying that discrimination exists, but he argues that others who are also discriminated, such as the Jews, the Chinese, or West Indian blacks, still rise the socioeconomic ladder and often outperform whites. So discrimination cannot be placed as a culprit for the general economic disparity we witness.
It is generally, for instance, assumed that the white man makes a lot more than the black man. You go on to say this is only in part true. Would you elaborate on that?
Yes, that it's true in general. If you then try to find out why is it true simply because all blacks or a substantial part of blacks, regardless of education, cannot get jobs in their professions? The recent data, and this would not necessarily apply 20 or 30 years ago, the recent data indicate, for example, that black West Indians earn 94% of the income of the average American. if you take second generation black West Indians, they earn higher incomes than Anglo-Saxons. And so it's very hard to make the argument that the white employer is looking into the genealogy of the black job applicant. It's very doubtful if he has any interest in it, much less that he's inquiring into it. It's simply that other people who make that inquiry find these kinds of differences, which you then cannot attribute to the employer because he's probably totally unaware of the whole situation.
And by the same token, the employer is in many instances not equipped to discriminate, say, against a Puerto Rican, even if he wanted to, right? Because there are no visual differences between.
Well, with Puerto Ricans,
Mexicans, right?
there would be with some, and with others there would not be. Yeah. But again, it's quite easy to tell that black West Indians are black, and yet that doesn't seem to have the income effect that you would expect on the basis of the prevailing theories.
Or that.
In short, what Sowell is saying is that cultural differences have a major economic and social impact. Our tendency is to attribute black-white differences to a legacy of slavery, but blacks from the West Indies also had a history of enslavement, but brought with them to the United States a very different culture, which reflects in their success in entrepreneurship, education, and the professional fields. Although the two groups of blacks shared a history of enslavement, what they did not share was the redneck culture. Therefore, the abandonment of such counterproductive culture should be placed as priority. Thomas Sowell goes on to explain that liberal policies actually harm the black community. By promoting elements such as black pride, or providing excuses such as systemic racism for poor performance, they are preventing the black community from evolving. Progress must be done through internal changes, not by pointing the blame at others. In his own words,
"Those who provide black rednecks with alibis do no favor to them, to other blacks, or to the larger society in which we all live. In American society, achievement is what ultimately brings respect, including self-respect. Only for those who have written off blacks' potential for achievement will alibis be an acceptable substitute. Such external explanations require no painful internal changes in the black population, but leave all changes to whites, who are seen as needing to be harangued, threatened, or otherwise forced to change."
To what extent do you find that then that the welfare state is trying to preserve an ethos which precisely, I understand you to say, we need to liberate ourselves from?
Yes, that politics really involves getting people to vote for you, and people vote for you when they think that they can depend on you, when they are dependent on you. To the extent that people become self-reliant and can feel they're perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, to that extent do you lose your hold on their votes.
That's kind of a harsh generality, isn't it? Because a lot of people who really are philanthropically minded are in favor of the kind of thing that is generally understood as charitable intercession, isn't it?
Yes, there are people who are professional politicians who simply look at the bottom line of where the votes go. There are other people who sincerely believe that if they will hand out things here and there, that this will in fact benefit people. Again, looking at
your point is it doesn't.
It doesn't. I haven't been able to find. I haven't been able to find a single country in the world where the policies that are being advocated for blacks in the United States have lifted any people out of poverty. I've seen many examples around the world of people who began in poverty and ended in affluence. Not one of them has followed any pattern at all like what is being advocated for blacks in the United States. Many groups have remained in poverty for a very long time trying to follow those patterns.
Now, this episode is just scratching the surface of Sowell's in-depth work on redneck and ghetto culture. The book goes much more in depth and is a must-read for anyone interested in social affairs and culture. Those of you interested in the full story should purchase the book. Link is in the description. Since this is a location channel, one place worth checking out is the African Burial Ground in New York City. It is a touching historical monument and museum that displays some of the tragic history of slavery in New York. The place is free to visit and is a great place to bring your family. Those of you who want to visit the African Burial Ground should save this location on a Cityscape app. Thomas Sowell is famous and well received in the conservative and libertarian communities. In fact, President George W. Bush presented him with the National Humanities Medal for his prolific work. Sowell has even received praise from the legendary economist F.A. Hayek. Outside that circle, however, Sowell's influence is rather limited. Many people find him too conservative, and some even consider him a Western apologist. Thomas Sowell is still a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution and is very much a living secret. I personally admire his brilliance and no excuse attitude. In fact, I think he's one of the smartest men of the 20th century. Despite my admiration for his intellect, I do believe that Sowell's argument is a piece of the puzzle, not the entire key. Liberals have valid points, and a full solution will only come when both sides work together. Sowell raised himself from a high school dropout to a Harvard graduate who earns $4 million a year as an author and senior fellow at Stanford. Regardless of where you stand politically, we can all admire a man who lifted himself from rags to riches, regardless of their background. See you next time.